There was a line that this client gave me, which has just stuck with me, and I think it's just brilliant. He said, "But I also want to send them back out in the field with a little bit more air in their tires." And I thought that's part of it. A lot of it is just that being deflated. It's just like, you've got you've got like a resource of energy. But how do you keep replenishing that in a way? And that's what's really good with resilience. It's like, I look at resilience as something it's proactive. It's something that we need to develop before we need to use it, and we need to keep it topped up.
Welcome to the Fitness CEO Podcast, a show dedicated to helping fitness entrepreneurs launch and grow successful gyms. Here's your host, Bryce Henson.
All right, my friend Stacey Copes, welcome to the Fitness CEO Podcast. Very excited to have you today.
Oh, it's amazing to finally be here, and I'm really excited for the chat.
Oh, so am I. And for our audience, you were introduced through a dear friend of mine who's also a dear friend and business coach of ours, both, Craig Ballantyne, and who's also been on this particular podcast. So come highly referred, and your backstory is absolutely inspirational. So really, I want to start off there. For our audience who doesn't know you, Stacey, please provide your backstory, and we'd love to learn from you this way.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So I'm currently a resilience expert, but I've come to resilience not through the typical way. I think a lot of resilience experts that we see are, I think, the textbook resilience experts. So they're either academics or psychologists, and that's how they've come to speak about resilience. But for me, I've come from pure life experience. And if I'm going back to my early days, I was a pretty rare young person in that I knew before I even started my earliest schooling what I wanted to do with my life. And all I wanted to do was be a vet. So everything I did was just focused on that. And I was completely, driven. That was the passion. And I was also an athlete. So I was the pitcher in the softball team in summer, and I was one of the first two girls to ever play soccer for my school. So this is back in the late 80s. So I'm sort of dating myself now. And so at 12 years old, I was in a really good place in my life where I'd actually gotten into a selective agricultural school for my secondary schooling. So that was like, yep, awesome. I'm so on track to, that dream of becoming a vet. And also as far as, doing the softball, doing the soccer, I was also a rep runner, and I represented my school from every distance, from the 100 meters right through to the cross country. So 100 meters to 3 kilometers, did all of those things. So, so pretty talented athlete, doing amazing academically, and I had pretty normal family life, great friends. So I was in a position in my life then, at 12 years old, where I was like, yeah, I am so on track, I know where I'm going, and I'm feeling really good about this. But unfortunately, all of those things got completely turned upside down for me. It was actually the 2nd of December 1990, and I was visiting a relative's place where I'd been many, many times before. And what I did was what I did every time I visited there was they had a backyard swimming pool. And it was one of those above ground pools, so it wasn't that deep. But what I did every time I was there is I like to just climb up on the edge and dive in. And on this day, I was there with my younger brother, who was 10, and a couple of other boys who were a little bit younger than him. So I didn't want anything to do with them. So I just kept doing that, just climbing up on the edge and diving in. And it wasn't going unnoticed. I was getting yelled at to stop, but I'm sure you remember what it was like to be 12, and we're bulletproof and invincible at that age. So I'm like, meh, just ignored that. But this one particular time I was standing on the edge, and I was thinking that I'd been splashing too much as I was diving in. So I stood there for a moment and I thought, how could I make a perfect dive? And so I thought for a while, and I thought, what if I was to hold my feet together and keep my legs straight? I thought, in theory, that would make less splashing as I dived in. So I took a deep breath and I did exactly that. And it felt like any other dive that I'd done before, until I went to try and swim up to the surface, and I found I couldn't move. I didn't feel any pain. It didn't feel like anything had gone wrong. The only thing is I could not move. So I was holding my breath, panic set in really quickly, and I was like desperately, how can I get the attention of my brother to help me, which I couldn't do. So I held my breath for as long as I could, and then when I realised I couldn't hold it any longer, that panic turned into a moment of absolute terror where I had to give in, and as I gave in and I breathed in and my lungs filled with water, I blacked out. And eventually my brother realised something was wrong and they raised the alarm for help. And it was actually at the third hospital I was taken to late that night that a doctor came and saw me in intensive care and told me that I'd actually broken my neck and drowned and that I'd never walk again. So for somebody that was, that fiercely independent, driven, motivated athlete, like that felt like a death sentence to me, being told that I'd never walk again. I spent 7 months in hospital, the first 8 weeks of that flat on my back, staring at a ceiling. And I had a lot of time to think at that time. And like all that, I was just, I was so angry that I was never going to be able to play the sports that I loved. I was devastated I couldn't pursue that dream of being a vet. One of the biggest things, I think, being a 12-year-old girl was I was like, boys are never going to be interested in me ever again. And so it was all that process of mourning of everything I identified as everything I thought I was going to be, felt like it was gone in that moment. So look, the years that followed were really, really quite dark. I was really good at this. I'm getting on with life. Everything's great. Nothing to see here. But on the inside, it was like I was bitter and angry and resentful. And like a lot of teenagers, I sought some pretty unhealthy ways of dealing with how I was feeling about that. And so my outlets were getting drunk and getting stoned. And I spent a lot of my time in those sort of high school years, drunk and stoned. And I look at it now and it's like they were like moments of artificial happiness that I was creating. But ultimately what was happening is in between I was sort of sinking deeper into those, pits of depression, despair and anxiety. But again, kept it really to myself. I didn't want to talk about it. And when I look back at that period of my time now, I realized that while physically I drowned once, emotionally I was drowning every single day. So it was a really tough time. I think being a teenager is hard enough. It's such that pivotal time around trying to discover your identity and of course there's all the different dynamics with social groups, but also from a body perspective, and being a teenage girl, here I was like with a body that didn't work the way that everyone else's did, and so I had all those added pressures there as well. So those years were really, really dark, and it took quite a long time to sort of get out the other side of that. But if we're to sort of fast forward to now, it's that's 32 years ago now, so it's pretty crazy. And so today is actually my 44th birthday, and so we're like 32 years on from that, and so
happy birthday.
Thank you. The festival of 40s rolls on, and so that was I guess that's I guess the big thing, that sort of the big life event that led me to the path to eventually be talking about resilience from my own life experience of reverse engineering. How did I get from that lowest point in my life to where I've been over the last sort of 11 years since I started speaking about resilience?
Well, Stacey, I'm speechless. That's an incredible story. Certainly very tragic on one hand, but obviously you've taken the champion and the victor mindset, not the victim mindset, which I just speaks spades and volumes about you. I want to dive in a little bit more because I think there's a lot of nuggets that we can glean for our audience who, number one, are going through life, but then two, are interested business entrepreneurs or already entrepreneurs. And let's face it, adversity and resilience is just part of the formula. Now, to the depths that you've had to experience it was probably much greater than the average person. But from your perspective, walk us through kind of that aha moment. As you mentioned before, in your later teens, struggling with drugs and alcohol just to kind of as a coping mechanism. But then you mentioned 11 years ago is when you decided to at least speak, starting to kind of spread your message. What was the big aha moment for you that you realized, okay, I need to stop playing the victim and I need to become the victor of my life and share that message?
Yeah, it was a bit of a gradual process, but I think where that really big shift came for me, it would have been my early 20s, and I think it was one of those things that I got into university. I deferred. I never went. I got a job, and I pretty much was doing what all of my peers were doing, and so there was just that element of like, okay, there's always going to be some things that physically I can't do because that accident left me needing a wheelchair for the rest of my life, and I'm a quadriplegic, so it's it's difficult to do a lot of the day-to-day stuff. But I got to the point where I looked at what had happened and I realized that while I couldn't change what had happened, I could change the story I told about what happened, both to myself and others, which I didn't really talk to anyone about what had happened. I was, very, very closely guarded on those things. But I couldn't change what had happened, but I could change the story I told about what happened. And most importantly, I could change everything I did from that point forward. And so that was a big shift. And eventually that evolved into, I'm actually incredibly grateful for what had happened. It actually ended up being probably the best thing that happened in my life. And most people think, like, how the heck can ending up a quadriplegic and needing a wheelchair for the rest of your life be positive? But when people spend time with me, they quickly realize that I'm genuinely grateful for how it's changed my life and the opportunities it's given me that I can say with absolute certainty that I would never have had my life taken the path that I'd planned it. And it was just incredible once I shifted that lens and I looked at possibilities and opportunities rather than problems and obstacles. It was like suddenly there was opportunity everywhere. And that's when I really started to look for different things to do. And I'd sort of felt all of my life, I'd sort of felt that I was here to make a difference, but I really didn't know what it was. And so from that point forward, it was a matter of going, well, okay, what can I do? And also just that not taking anything for granted. It was like, I want to make the most of every opportunity. And that's been probably one of the biggest gifts of that, is that, not just not take things for granted, but I had this burning desire. I just wanted to, do more, see more, be more, and give more and have an impact. But I wasn't sure what that was going to look like. But once you've got that lens on the world, it's amazing what sort of things come across your path.
So I want to dive into the lens that you teach now from a leadership perspective, because other companies hire you. But before I do, I want to kind of dig in one more time specifically to this background, because, to your point, to hear that this is one of the most grateful experiences in your life is it can be mind-boggling, right? And I give you so much credit and accolades for that. Walk us through that process. And I'm now we're talking to a business owner who, maybe they just got a divorce. Maybe they're having a hard time with payroll. Maybe they just went through COVID-19 and we have brick and mortar facilities and their business contracted, to a point where potentially they're, in a really tough situation. Many of these and more can come up in the life of an entrepreneur. So, from your lens and from a teaching perspective, what are some framework or tools that you can provide someone in that position to really give them the opportunity and realization that, hey, I can actually take this and become better for it and not actually be, succumb to it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you sort of touched on, particularly with the pandemic and stuff like that, I realized that my own personal experience is quite extreme in, it's extreme consequences, extreme impact, an extreme situation. But I feel that the pandemic has given most people a little bit of a taste of what it's like to have their lives changed in an instant and having absolutely no control over it. So I feel that, my experience has become probably more relevant in that, because I can sort of apply those things. And yeah, I think that's the thing is, a life of an entrepreneur, and I've started 2 businesses myself. I'm still running one, been through a divorce as well. So it's like I've sort of throw all those sort of things into the mix. But I think in the moment, and I think this is a big thing, is that when things are overwhelming and there's so much going on and there's all these pressures, the most important thing is actually to come back into the moment. Because in the moment, it's you can't feel so stressed because you're not worrying about the future. You're not beating yourself up about the past, because I think when we beat ourselves up about the past, that's kind of where depression lives. When you get too worried about the future, that's where anxiety lives. So if we can bring ourselves back into the moment, that's where we can actually have a clear head. We can make good decisions, because we can't make good decisions, particularly in business, if we're stressed. If our body's in that fight or flight or freeze mode, we don't have the best of our abilities with us. So the thing that I use to bring things back into the moment is gratitude. So in that moment, first step is going to be to stop and say thank you. And it sounds counterintuitive, especially when you're in a moment where everything just feels like it's too much and you can't see a way out of it. But the rationale behind using gratitude is you actually can't feel bad about something you're grateful for, and you can't feel two opposing emotions at the same time. So if you can go, thank you for the opportunity to be in this moment right now, that just brings that grounding into the moment, and it removes the stress. So the first step is always just like, thank you, gratitude, get in the moment. The second step I like to get people to look at is, okay, where's the opportunity in this? What's the gift in this? What can I learn from this situation? Sometimes that isn't going to be immediately apparent. Sometimes but it's asking the question, it's planting the seed. Sometimes you might, if you actually give yourself the space and you're in the moment and you actually just, and again, space is a good thing. So, set aside half an hour of just thinking time without getting stressed about it, and just go, okay, well, where are the opportunities? If this moment is to be a gift, what could that gift be? And even just start to, get your notepad and just sort of go, well, where could this take us from this moment? And then the third step, the third step is something that, again, it's planting a seed. Often it's not apparent in the moment, is, okay, so we've had this situation, we've discovered these things, we've found all these opportunities, and we've found what we could learn from it. The next step is like, how could that help somebody else? Because if we have a situation that seems negative, we've learned something, then we could help somebody else with that. Like, what an amazing gift. Like, how valuable is that situation? And that framework, the thank you, what's the lesson, how could this help somebody else? That's just something it's just three simple steps in any moment, just brings you back into that, okay, I'm in the zone, I'm in a problem solving zone, I'm not in a problem finding zone. And that can be a really good way just to shift out of the overwhelm into, okay, where's the opportunity? Where's the possibilities in this moment?
Oh, Stacey, I love that. So much gold, and especially that framework, that step-by-step plan of action can really help. For me, I give a keynote called Pain, Passion, Purpose, and it's really about going through your pain, developing a passion, and really, providing a purpose, and, developing your purpose, which to your point really could be helping others. So very similar in kindred spirits, and love that. Now, transitioning, through your experience, now you're a speaker and you're on podcasts and on circuit, you're an author, which we'll talk about in your book a little bit later. But one of the things that, in researching you, I realized that you develop sales trainings for, different companies through leadership and being more productive, engaging, and more resilient, overcoming adversity. And there's a handful of topics that you talk on. The two that I really want to pull out is just really resiliency, overcoming adversity, and then being a high performance or creating a high performance organizational culture. So really, I kind of want to set the framework of really that's kind of the topic I'm referring to. But I'm curious, when you go in and meet with companies and train different leaders and whatnot, what do you think their biggest bottlenecks are around that framework, and how do you help them through it?
Yeah, a lot of times people come to me from a resilience perspective. Usually one of two reasons. One, it's an overcoming adversity thing, particularly if I'm working with sales teams. So obviously, sales is it's filled with setbacks, disappointments, rejections. You've got to keep dusting yourself off and getting yourself out there. And the other one is dealing with change and uncertainty, which, it's always been an issue, but it's become more of an issue as it is now. So a lot of the time it's just going out and sitting with these, with the people that are getting me in. And I just like to really just to get to know them, get to know their business, get to know what the big challenges are for their organization, what the challenges are for their people. So I think, particularly with the sales ones, it's just that constantly being able to dust yourself off and keep going out there. And I love one of my clients in the past. He said that that they came to me and said, look, we really want to we've got our national sales team, got them all together, and I specifically they want to talk about overcoming adversity in the sales process. But there was a line that this client gave me, which has just stuck with me, and I think it's just brilliant. He said, but I also want to send them back out in the field with a little bit more air in their tires. And I thought that's part of it. A lot of it is just that being deflated. It's just like, you've got like a resource of energy. But how do you keep replenishing that in a way? And that's what's really good with resilience. It's like, I look at resilience as something it's proactive. It's something that we need to develop before we need to use it, and we need to keep it topped up. So that's a biggie. And if we're looking at high performance, similar kind of thing. A lot of the high performance stuff is around, creating good habits and good rituals. I talk a lot about rituals for resilience. But resilience is it's such a foundational piece of being a high performer, because so much of high performance is that ability to keep going when things don't go to plan. It's the ability to keep motivated, to keep inspired, and to also not be constantly looking outside of ourselves for that. So it's helping. I think that's a big challenge too, is people are always looking outside of themselves for some kind of motivation or inspiration. And a lot of time people go, well, how do I get motivated? How do I get inspired? And, my answer always is if your primary source of motivation and inspiration isn't internal, then it's not going to be sustainable in the long term. So it's helping them to start to develop some of those things, and as I said, with really good resources of resilience, then that's just, as I said, foundation from which anything is possible.
And it's interesting you talk about the internal and external, because being in the fitness space for a long time, we provide a lot of external coaching and support, whether it be fitness coaching, nutrition coaching, mindset coaching, and that definitely helps, right? That can take a client that doesn't have that and really put them in a position, but really long term, to be sustainable, they have to have that internal reasoning, and that's why we have strategy sessions and sit down with them, kind of connect with them at a deeper level, find out what that internal reason, what's that really big why? Because to your point, Stacey, that's the reason, and that internal belief, internal reason is going to be what continues them to be able to overcome adversity and really stay on the resilience train. So I absolutely love that. I want to transition, interestingly enough, and again, I was doing a little research here, and you have a philosophy, which I'll talk about here in a second, which is say yes and figure out later, which is incredible, especially for business entrepreneurs, because one of our core values is embracing and driving change here at Fit Body Bootcamp, and that's what you need to do, as a business owner, because things come at you and they happen fast, and ultimately, you gotta figure it out and say yes and figure that out later. So I'd love to hear a little bit more on that. Before I do, though, in kind of the subject of this particular podcast episode with you, I'm a huge fan and student of the Stoic philosophy, or the Stoicism, if you will, and I'm sure you're probably cued into that. I'm a huge follower of Ryan Holiday, but I believe that philosophy so much, and I've gone through so much challenge, just like many people out there, probably not to the level that you have, being very candid, but the way I view Stoic philosophy is if you can take whatever comes at you and actually use it as fuel to make you better, and I think you do that and have done that in spades. So that's a philosophy that keeps me grounded. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on Stoic philosophy, and then of course bringing it back to my earlier point, the philosophy of saying yes and figuring out later.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the Stoics as well, and I think there's a lot of people that criticize the Stoics because they're just like, oh, they see it as quite pessimistic in a way, but I'm like, no, it's actually so realistic, and I do quote some of them at times as well, but what I love about it is it really, I think the foundation for me is, when we're looking at Stoicism, it's that whole thing. It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to it, and I liken it to look at poker. So you can win poker with the worst hand. It's just about how you play it. It's how you bluff it. It's how you do all those things. And so it doesn't matter what hand any of us have been dealt. It's how we play it. So that's what I love about the Stoicism. I also like, with the Stoicism, it's like, it's looking ahead and going, well, sometimes what's the worst that could possibly happen? And, and have an element of being somewhat prepared for it. But it's not to say that you're going to manifest that. It's just having that element of being realistic. And I think that's something that I love about, resilience as well. And resilience in, my perspective of resilience is how we can actually grow and learn through being challenged, not just how do we cope or how do we bounce back to where we were. And so I love that about the Stoics as well. There's so much wisdom in it. And I totally recommend people digging into some of that. I've actually just downloaded Ryan Holiday's latest book about discipline. I've got that queued up in my Audible to go next. And so I love that he's really championed it, I think, at this point in time. So so I definitely recommend people having a little bit of a dig into some of the Stoic stuff. It's timeless, and particularly I think for business, I think there's so much we can learn from it. If we're going back to, as you said, my sort of approach to life of saying yes and figuring out how later, my goodness, there's just been so many examples in my life of doing that. And sometimes I look back and I go, I cannot believe I actually said yes to that, because I think that the big issue is a lot of people don't say yes to things because they don't have the detailed step-by-step plan on how they're going to get there. When realistically, all we need to know is, what's the destination we're aiming for, and what's the first step. And the thing I can sort of liken it most to things that we do in our day-to-day lives is, you jump in your car and you use your GPS, and you pop the destination in, and what does it do? It tells you the first step, and it doesn't tell you the next step until you take that first step. The next one appears. And I just feel life is so much like that. It's like when you commit and just say yes to what's that big outcome, all we need to know is what the first step is. And as we take the first step, things just appear. And when you've got that focus, it's just been remarkable. But a lot of people, as I said, don't say yes because they don't have the plan, or just out of pure fear. What I've discovered, particularly over the last sort of probably 10 years, is that the more something scares me, the more likely I am to say yes to it. Because there is an element of that's where growth lives. Growth lives in discomfort. When we get ourselves out of our comfort zone, when we put ourselves in situations where we are going to be, put under resistance, under pressure, under tension, all of those things. I think if we can consciously do that intentionally, then just the power in that is amazing. But I think if I was going to use an example, probably the absolute craziest thing that I've said yes to was it was a few years ago. I got a message on LinkedIn, and it was actually from a film director. And I have had no exposure to anything related to films, acting, or anything. And I got this message, someone that I'm not connected with, and she said, I'm directing just a low budget indie feature film in Sydney, and we're looking for a lead actress who uses a wheelchair. Would this be something that might be up your alley? And I was like, okay, this is never anything that's been on my radar. So the first thing I did was I had to sort of do a little bit of bit of research because I thought, is this dodgy? And and then I realized, no, it was totally legit. And I just sort of thought, this is the craziest thing ever. I've never acted, never thought about it. And I sent a message back and I said, look, let's have a chat. It terrified me, the thought of doing that, having a lead role as well, and being the only person involved in the film that wasn't a professional actor. Anyway, I said yes, and I had no idea how I was going to do it. I was like, if you've got the confidence that I can do it, they'd see some of my YouTube videos and they're like, yeah, we think you can do it. We'll just show you how to do it through the way. And then fast forward from that conversation, 9 months later, I sat in a theatre, a big cinema in Sydney, and I watched myself on a big screen with a lead role in a romantic comedy. Because I said yes, even though I was friggin' terrified. And what terrified me even more was once they started doing all the social media announcements of the cast, I was top billing on the poster and everything, and I'm like, I'm this complete unknown. And then I got terrified that I was going to let everybody else down. That all these people that was their career, that they were actors, and here I was, this blow-in that was just, just so happened to, it was good they were casting authentically. But yeah, it was just, I learned so much in the process. So that was a huge one. But I've had lots of examples. I ended up volunteering in the Solomon Islands. I'd never been overseas before. I went over there a couple of weeks and mentored people. I ended up running for local and state government in Sydney, in my 20s, as this idealistic 20-something wanting to make a difference. Here I was, as a candidate for state government. Just all these things I just said yes to, and I'm just like, I'll learn from it. I moved into state. I'd never even been on a plane before, and I bought a one-way ticket and moved to another state. All of these things have just been such incredible parts in my growth, though. And you don't have to do massive things, but if I encourage people, particularly, in their business and fitness journeys, be open to opportunities. When something comes up, rather than just defaulting to no and having all your reasons why not, just open up to the possibility. It's like, where could this possibly lead? And it's not to say that you say yes to everything, because if you say yes to something that you're going to regret later, then we've been in those situations before. But yeah, I think just opportunities for growth. Put yourself in that situation. You just can never know where it might lead.
Totally. And I think you brought up a good point at the end. I mean, one, all the experiences that it afforded you by taking that, yes mentality and, really taking action opened incredible doors for you. The last point you talked about was you can't say yes to everything, though, because ultimately you are saying no to something in reverse, especially if you don't really have your heart in and you want to do it. So that just takes a bit of wisdom, and with time and business maturation, you should be able to assess the situation. Hey, if I say yes to this opportunity, will this really put me ahead? Or will it actually limit my time? If that's the case, or limit my ability to execute on the priorities, then you actually should default to no. But if there's an opportunity that that, man, this could lead to something bigger, but you're just scared, you're nervous, you don't have that confidence, when you have that little tingling in your gut, ultimately, from my perspective, you got to jump at it. And, to you, Stacey, all these doors open up for me, from being a business owner to living in South America to, becoming a vice president and the CEO of an international franchise. I was scared. I was nervous. I didn't know every single step, to your point. But like that GPS, I took that first step and then doors opened up. And really, that's what I'm hearing from you as well.
Yeah, it totally works that way. And again, you just never know where it might lead. But yeah, I guess the thing is, like, if it's going to be a massive detour and a time suck, then, you've got to be careful of that. And particularly when you're balancing, if you're someone that's, got a business and you're doing all these things and you've got a family, then, obviously you don't want to take away from that. That's something that's super, super important. But also, I think it's great if you do have a family sometimes to demonstrate that to your kids, to go, you know what, I'm taking chances. I'm trying new things, and demonstrate to your children, and also to your staff, and to the people that potentially you're training in your gyms and stuff like that. Be the example, because we can't ask anybody else to do something we haven't done ourselves. So I think that's really important. Just step up, be an example, share the experience with others, and again, you can really inspire them as well.
What's up, my friend? Bryce here. Now, you might know me as the co-host of this podcast and the CEO of FitBody. But what many people don't know is that I actually began my journey as a FitBody franchise owner. Now, being an owner, I wake up every day absolutely doing what I love. I live my passion. I help people transform their lives and have both financial and personal freedom. And it's for these reasons and many more that other owners join the brand and open their own FitBody locations too. So if you're looking to build a highly profitable business, take charge of your life, and create an impact in your very own community, then opening a FitBody gym might be a perfect fit for you. Now, to see if a territory is available in your area, as we have very limited spots due to our incredible growth, go ahead and visit our website at fbbcfranchise.com to complete an application. Well, thanks, and back to the show.
All right, Stacey. Well, you've been so gracious with your time. We still have some time left for our lightning round where we can kind of extract some more value, gold nuggets from me if you're up for it.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. Well, you clearly are a passionate person. Otherwise, you wouldn't have overcome all this adversity and resilience to be successful that you are today. What would you say is your biggest passion today, and why?
Look, it's linked to resilience, and it's one of my key principles of resilience is personal responsibility. And I think that it's something that's missing a lot in the world today. Is there's so many people that have just got this entitlement mentality that it's always someone else's fault and someone else has to fix it. So I'm really, really passionate about people taking personal responsibility for their experience in life, and also just again, I think I touched on it earlier. It's like when you got to you got to be a problem solver rather than a problem finder. And I think that there's so many people are just always pointing the finger out externally. I like to say that people have got blamatitis. It's like everyone's just like, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. And it's like, so I sort of say that blamatitis is a disease. And I often frame my my keynotes as it's like it's all these people that blamatitis. Something doesn't go to plan, and of course they want to look for something and someone to blame. And so I say that my sessions are their vaccination against blamatitis.
I'm gonna take that. That's incredible, and that's just so true. So I appreciate that. All right, next up, what would you say, Stacey, is your zone of genius, your area of expertise, something that you're extremely gifted with?
Yeah, I think, look, resilience is the obvious one, but I don't think I don't think it's just something that I'm naturally gifted in. It's something I've worked on, and it's something that I share with others. Is that resilience is not always just something that you naturally have. It's something that we need to develop, we need to build on, and very closely linked to that is gratitude. I have a remarkable ability to find gratitude in every situation, and I think that that's been such a huge part of then in turn building my resilience, but also really helped me to have the amazing experiences I've had, because again my approach is that I'm grateful for everything and entitled to nothing. And I think if we can look at the world that way, then it's just incredible what opportunities can come our way too. So gratitude and obviously resilience is the superpower.
Love that. And I also want to reiterate something you said earlier in the talk we had about developing resilience. You just said it right here as well, but even what you said earlier is develop resilience before you need it. And that really, struck a chord with me because, in life, you can either do hard things and do easy things first and have a hard life, or you can do hard things first and have an easy life. So, training yourself, going to the gym, eating well, getting good night's sleep, researching, developing your business skills. Those are hard things at first, but your life becomes easier. And really the way I heard that from you, Stacey, is if you do those hard things, you're actually developing resilience. So that way, when something outside of your control happens, you can better really overcome that. Would that be fair to say from your lens?
Yeah, it is. And I think the thing is that it's often, stretching ourselves and doing some of the hard things and builds resilience. But resilience itself can be built by very, very simple rituals and practices. And I liken resilience to going, it's so much like going to the gym. We go to the gym proactively to build and maintain physical strength. And in the gym, we choose the muscle groups that we're going to work on, and we do specific, simple but repetitive exercises over time that builds the muscle. Resilience is exactly the same. So it's finding these simple rituals and practices that we do repeatedly over time builds our resilient strength. And again, much like going to the gym, it's that use it or lose it. It's not like we can, I listened to this podcast or I read a book on resilience and suddenly I've got this magic resilience ability for life. It's like going to the gym. It's like, you don't go to the gym because you're like, something's sore today, so I'm just going to go and fix that in the gym. It's a proactive thing that we do, and resilience is exactly the same. So I look at, some of the, in my book, I've got all these different exercises you can do for your resilience. And I say, kind of that's your resilience gym. So it's so tightly linked.
Oh, I love that. It's a repetition of that, which is a great way to develop that. Next up, Stacey, what would you say in your life has been one of your proudest or biggest accomplishments? And it could be life perspective, it could be business, or both.
Look, like I said, there's been many, but I think the biggest thing is being able to have gone through what I've done, and that's why I feel I've been incredibly blessed. With all of the adversity I've had, not just dealing with the accident, but just business success, business failure, relationship success, relationship failure, fitness, all those type of things, sports, all those type of things have been amazing. So I think just to have been able to then reverse engineer all of that and then go, here's a simple framework for resilience that's based, I'd say it's backed by life rather than, some kind of, everyone's obsessed with this evidence-based stuff at the moment. And I'm just like, what more evidence do you need than life proof, rather than a bunch of surveys that someone at a university did at one moment in time. I don't know. I'm a little bit skeptical of some of that stuff. So I think that I'm really proud that I've been able to, and it's been through working with mentors. Like, I didn't pick the word resilience. I had a mentor that said to me once, resilience really encapsulates what you do. But still, I'm proud that I actually picked that up, because ultimately I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to be a speaker. I didn't want to talk about myself because I thought everyone would think I was a total wanker for talking about myself. And it's a big Australian thing, tall poppy syndrome, don't stand out, don't say you're good, you get pegged down. So I'm really proud that I fought that, and I had mentors that said to me, look, it's not about you, it's about your audience, and if you don't share your story, being selfish. And so I'm really glad that I acted on the advice and the wisdom of my coaches and mentors over the years, and then down the track now, being able to be an international speaker and author and have these conversations. I'm really proud that I've been able to do that.
Now, speaking of author, and one of my last questions lightning around was going to be, what's either a book or a podcast, some sort of learning content that really developed you in your, career that you can share with our audience to really help them as well. I'm still curious in that question, but to plug your book, How to Be Resilient, I am curious, and maybe a couple takeaways of the book, but even more specifically, it was endorsed by the infamous Brian Tracy, and I'm dying to know how that happened.
Yeah, do you know what I did? I actually just did, because I was thinking, who do I want? And I got my own coaches and mentors and stuff like that. So I had some really good, Australian names that said great things about the book. And I was like, that's awesome. But I'm like, I want to be a leader in resilience, particularly in a business sense. And I'm like, well, who is the biggest name in any kind of business training, and particularly like sales and business leadership and stuff like that? I'm like, oh my gosh, Brian Tracy, like he's the godfather of this stuff. Obviously, before him was Jim Rohn. Jim's not with us anymore. But I'm like, who could I access? I had zero connection to Brian. So what I did was I did some research, and I'm like, how could I get in touch with Brian? And I ended up just finding on one of his websites was the contact for booking him as a speaker. And I thought, okay, this could be a nice little in rather than just doing a contact us on the website. So I just sent a little bit of a pitch, and I just said, look, this is my personal story, and this is the book I've written here. So that if you'd like, I can send you a summary. But I said, look, I just really love if I admire Brian's work, and I'd just be honoured if Brian could just share a few words by way of endorsing the book and the content. And I ended up getting an email back from his EA with a message from Brian directly, and Brian said he was really inspired by my story and my journey, and he relayed his own experience where he'd had a significant back injury. He spent a year in a wheelchair not long prior to that, and he said, look, I would be absolutely honoured. He goes, look, obviously he got back out of the chair and all that stuff, but he said, look, I'd be honoured. And that cover endorsement that I have from Brian about it can change your philosophy of life. I'm like, oh my gosh, like what greater endorsement from what most amazing person. So yeah, I guess this is big thing is aim high. You don't ask, you don't get. And I heard someone say once that every time you ask, you risk the possibility of a yes.
You risk the possibility of a yes.
Of a yes, and I loved that.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm going to take personally so much out of this content. But for our audience to get anything, I certainly have, which is incredible. So, well, that all met. I wanted to plug your book just, for to do you a solid. And obviously I was dying to know how that came to happen, because that certainly is a name behind that, someone that I've looked up into and studied from for many years. But aside from that, do you have any other book or content that you want to plug that really has helped you along your journey that could help our audience?
Yeah, I had a bit of a ponder on this, because I think, look, I think there's so many of us, typical books that have changed our lives are the common ones, like Think and Grow Rich. That was the game changer for me. So I thought, look, what's been really, really powerful for me over the last few years, I've put a lot of focus in my life on relationships, not just romantic relationships, but just relationships with family, with, in business, all that sort of stuff. And there was an amazing book that I read. I actually saw this person speak at an event in Sydney. So Dr. Jen Mann, and her book's called The Relationship Fix. And it's just an amazing book about love relationships, but it is just so practical. There's lots of checklists and different things you can do in that book, but I think that there's a lot of it we can take into all of our relationships. But I think particularly in business, it's really hard to juggle, your family, your partner, all that sort of stuff. And I think if we can really focus on having an amazing, solid relationship with our spouse, then that actually creates an amazing foundation for what we can do in business. We can demonstrate that as leaders, and we can demonstrate great relationships to our children as well. So The Relationship Fix, Dr. Jen Mann, I think is a brilliant book.
Oh, I certainly appreciate that. And, from a fitness perspective, this is something we always teach our owners and our coaches and our facility leaders in our brand is we are primarily, we're in the relationship business first and foremost. We teach the coaching, nutrition, the fitness secondarily. So that will be very much par for the course and really aligned with, what we teach. So, Stacey, this has been incredible. I have one last question for you, and I've certainly gleaned a lot of value from this particular episode, and I know our audience has too. But really, what would be one piece of parting wisdom that would really help our audience on their journey, who are interested in personal growth, in business, in entrepreneurship, and fitness, that they want to get to that next level? What would you say to that person?
I was in two minds. I got column A or column B. I'm going to go for column B on this one. So what I think is something that I found incredibly pivotal. I talk about it in my book under the principle of support. But the philosophy is that everything we do, every interaction we have, everything we consume, everything, every person we relate to, every conversation we have, everything we eat, we watch, we read, we do, is either making us feel light and energized or negative and drained. So throughout the course of every day, we need to be constantly assessing what impact are the things we are doing having on us personally, and constantly weighing up. Am I feeling like the net outcome is that I'm positive and growing, and I'm light and energized and moving in the right direction, or at the end of the day, am I feeling heavy and I feel like I'm going backwards? And so constantly looking through everything we do and going light or heavy, do more, do less. Initially I spoke about that in the context of the people we spend time with. But once I really dug into it deeply, I realized it's absolutely everything we do throughout the course of the day. So just constantly assessing, what you're doing, light or heavy, and then what's the net outcome at the end of the day, and make adjustments accordingly. And I think that can just make an incredible difference to your success in business, life, relationships. And I think it's a massive part of resilience.
Totally. Incredible framework to look through. So, Stacey, before we shoot today, I just want to thank you so much. I want to acknowledge you. Your story is absolutely incredible, but more importantly, the way you've overcame that. I'm a huge fan and student of Stoic philosophy, and you are just a living, breathing example of this. You've inspired me, you've inspired others, and really the big takeaway that I've heard from this is, resilience is repetition. It's a skill that you need to practice over and over. And to your point, really, what your last answer is, developing content like this, sharing this message out, to the world, is really helping people, move towards the light instead of the darkness. And we need a lot more of that in these times. So I just want to acknowledge you and thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege.
Well, friends, I know you got a ton of value, assuming you did. Give us a like, give us a subscribe on YouTube, write us an amazing review in iTunes, and specifically, write your biggest takeaway in the comment section on YouTube. We'd love to continue to engage and add more value. So, Stacey, I want to thank you again, and friends, we'll see you in the next episode.